Welcome, everyone. I think we have participants from all over the world today. So good morning and good afternoon and good evening. And a warm welcome to this first webinar in our new UN Capital Development SINTEF series, which is called Bridging the Gaps. My name is Anneli Alatalo-Paulsen. I am the head of Global Sustainable Development at SINTEF, and it's a great pleasure to open this 5-part series with you. And this series was born from a question that is simple but quite urgent, I'd say, which is, why is it still so hard to take a good idea or a promising technology or a successful pilot and turn it into something that actually works at scale in real communities and in the places where the needs are greatest? And across 5 sessions, from technology and innovation today to Ukraine's reconstruction, climate resilience, food value chains, and the scaling of pilots to policy, we will come back to this same red thread, which is how do we move from potential to impact? How do we move from isolated initiatives to lasting and systemic change, or from siloed efforts to genuine collaboration? And this question actually sits at the heart of SINTEF's history. SINTEF is one of Europe's largest independent research organizations, and we were founded in 1950 with a mission to take knowledge from the lab and into society, to turn research into real-world solutions to create value, innovation, and better lives. And at the core of this is a belief that technology matters the most when it actually reaches people. And that impact can only happen when we work together, across sectors, disciplines, and maybe most importantly, across borders. This aligns deeply with UNCDF's mandate as well, which is enabling innovation, financial, and technological inclusion in the places where it can make the biggest difference. Our first webinar is going to focus on something that is both simple and maybe a bit radical at the same time, which is the idea that countries in the global south should have access to the technologies that can solve the challenges that they face, whether that's in food systems or climate, biodiversity, or industrial production. We know that this gap is enormous, and it's not because the technologies don't exist, but because pathways for adaptation or implementation or financing or regulation or collaboration are fragmented or sometimes even missing. So too often, efforts remain in silos. We will have higher education working in one place, civil society in another, and private sector somewhere else. So to explore this from multiple angles today, we have an excellent panel with us. We have Pradeep Kurukulasuriya, who's Executive Secretary at UN Capital Development Fund. We have Støa, Vice President of Research at SINTEF. We have Ytreland, Senior Advisor at Norad, and Solveig Tangen, who is CEO of the Norwegian African Business Association. They bring perspective from development finance, research innovation, public policy, and private sector, which I think is exactly the collaboration space that we need to get this right. When it comes to the more practical matters of today's webinar, we plan on starting off with a pitch from all the panelists, followed by a conversation around the topic of today. It's possible for you guys in the audience to ask questions to the panelists. And if you have a question, please post it in the Q&A section that you should have somewhere up here. And we will try to ask it during the conversation. So now I think I will give the word to my co-host of this webinar series, Tangen, who is a strategic engagement specialist at UN Capital Development Fund. And he will introduce the panelists and the pitches and lead the conversation. So over to you, Tangen.
Yes. Thank you, Anneli. Pleased to see so many participants here today, and thank you to the panel for being here. So I think we'll start off with just a short introduction and some opening reflections, and we'll start off with UNCDF and Pradeep Kurukulasuriya.
Thank you, Tangen. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You know, for us at UN Capital Development Fund, we see the need of many least developed countries, in terms of their development aspirations, to be centered on the issue of access to finance. whether it is cheaper finance, whether it is unlocking of domestic capital, and of course the ultimate aim to crowd in finance from outside of their countries. Of course, the issue is that this is a big problem in today's context when you think that only 4% of all global assets under management make their way to the developing world, and a fraction of a fraction, as I've said before, make their way to least developed countries, a lot of which are, of course, in Africa, but also the Pacific, and other small island developing states. Of all the finance flowing from multilateral development banks over the last 10 to 20 years, about 5 to 6% of it per year makes its way to what are considered C grade or unrated countries. So this is a big problem, getting access to finance. So we at UN Capital Development Fund are trying to use donor money that we get in the UN to essentially provide that upfront first loss de-risking capability, which we hope will crowd in finance, including for tech. So look forward very much to engaging in this conversation. Thank you, Tannes.
Thank you, Pradeep. And now we'll move on to SINTEF and Petter Støa. Yeah, we need to unmute, please.
Now unmuted. Thank you, Tannes. Try to be short. Also, just a kind of my picture of the global situation. I think that achieving the SDGs are at the crossroad. Also, the way straight ahead has kind of been blocked, or it has been dramatically narrowed. So we really need to come up with kind of new ways of making sure that we can reach the goals that we have ahead of us. And our idea, kind of to address this, is to take inspiration from a model proven in multiple nations, instruments that are used to boost innovation, because development is actually innovation through collaboration between governments, or close collaboration between governments, industry, and research. And as we see it, partly from the side, so it's possible to arrest me, is that the development sector actually lacks mechanisms to bring these actors together to create partnerships that also between those who have put technology to work with those who have not, and this way to facilitate development and deployment in the low and medium income countries. So we suggest a technology and innovation fund dedicated to development in low and medium income countries. This fund should not be traditional aid. It should be a global market-oriented innovation instrument, inspired, for those who are from Norway, what we call the Green Platform, or from those who are from Europe, from Europe's Horizon Europe, the world's largest innovation program, actually involving more than 30 nations to push innovation. So I agree with Pradeep that the challenge is that technology exists, the need is certainly there, capital is available, but the connection between them is not. And our fund is, or idea is a fund that would create this connection, not by dictating detailed solutions, but by issuing impact-oriented calls for projects that demand the type of cooperation that we need and are asking for, and fund the best projects according to a evaluation based on project quality, impact, and the consortium's ability to deliver on what they promise in the projects. These calls should be shaped in a big open dialogue between the funders and all the, I would say, imagined responding actors. to adapt to the reality in the given region and ensure a broad response of quality proposals. We believe it's a good approach for a call to be as concrete as possible, focus on the region, a value chain, and building the necessary innovation capacity. All, you could say, in one magic project. And a given, of course, is that the shaping of the call, evaluation of the proposals, and the implementation has to be transparent and open. Norway's role is that we have tried out this model historically and currently, and we find that it works, and we believe that it can be adopted globally. So some sense the value proposition is that if we can get together and partner up, we can help reduce emissions, create jobs, support economic development in the global south, whilst opening new markets and building future-oriented industries in the already developed countries. So creating a better society for all as a win-win, in a win-win approach. So that's it from me.
Okay, thank you, Petter. We'll move on to Ytreland from Norad.
Thank you, Tannes. It's great to be here with such a very great panel. So I wanted to sort of set the stage a little bit from the development sector's point of view. So why do we want to do more to really focus on partnering strategically with the private sector? I mean, even in the last year, it's become even more obvious that we cannot fill the Sustainable Development Goal investment gaps with official development assistance. And so given that sort of mismatch of public support and market need, we need to really think about how we can use our funding and our resources to really look into how we can convene, influence, steer, rather than act as the sort of rod engine of development cooperation. And so that brings me to this group and this conversation about understanding the gaps, alignment, and how can we strategically approach the private sector using all of the tools in our toolbox or enhancing the ones that we already are using. So maintaining our position of untied aid, which is something that we feel strongly about here in Norway, we still can look at the private sector here in Norway and in other countries to see how can we bring in available technology and competitive advantages and comparative advantages to contribute to the development goals at large. And so we think that the private sector, wherever it is located, has important technology, innovations, value chain expertise, and an ability to reach a scale through markets and customers that we just can't reach by focusing on beneficiaries alone. So when it comes to this work at Norad, we do have a portfolio of tools and mechanisms to work with the private sector. It includes guarantees for renewable energy projects, strategic value chain partnerships, enabling environment programs, often managed by multilateral development banks, institutions. So addressing constraints in the regulatory frameworks, all of that business enabling environment is crucial to lift all of these boats. But going into the more direct intervention, which is sort of more within the topic of this conversation, Norad has for a long time managed a business grant support scheme, which has been going on for a number of years and delivered strong results on job creation, access to renewable energy, mobilization of private capital, but not in every case. And so what we want to do is understand where does our toolbox meet the needs and what can we do more along with others and in sort of a co-creative way with the private sector and other stakeholders. And so we want to be mindful of how we can be more proactive in our approaches based on the type of sector that we're talking about. For instance, in renewable energy, we found that the market has been amenable to these kind of grant mechanisms, whereas maybe in adaptation or other sectors, there might be more of a a need and an interest in sort of more technical assistance and a more kind of well-rounded approach. In addition, we have had some experience with some of these funds that we could talk about during today's meeting, but we have had good experience also tapping into the Norwegian private sector, for instance, working with Ladal Medical on a Saving Lives at Birth program, which we can get into a little bit. So going back to sort of the tools, we have a good idea of how our grants work. And we want to also look at going beyond grants, right? What other types of financing can unlock more strategic, more value chain oriented partnerships with the private sector? We want to be able to meet companies where they are and help them deliver on the sustainable development goals. We want to look at sort of how can we use our grant-based mechanism to become a source of financing that is the type of financing needed for growth companies that have a development impact. And we can also look at going beyond financing, right? So how can we also use our network capabilities or other types of resources and work with partners so that we're kind of moving in the same direction as opposed to stopping at the financing or the grant agreement. We've seen some challenges. We know that there's been a weakening of Norwegian foreign direct investment, for instance, in Africa. So we want to understand what are some of the reasons behind that? Are they structural? Are there areas where our more proactive direct interventions can make a difference? But we also don't want to attribute more to our specific and localized interventions than we can, given the framework and the sort of the regulatory environment. So these are some of the considerations that we're thinking about and we're talking about here at Norad. And I'd be really interested and enthusiastic to hear perspectives from this panel and from conversations going forward. So.
Thank you so much, Anna. Very interesting perspectives from the three panelists so far. And I think last but not least, we have the private sector representative here, Solveig from the Norwegian African Business Association. So please.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on this panel today from warm Cape Town. So I'm currently here participating at the Mining in NABA with it's a quite good present from Norwegian companies here. So in this theme, so NABA is a member organization. We have been around for 15 years, and about 80% of our membership base is Norwegian companies, and then the rest is African international. So our job is to bridge the gap and understand how can we, open doors, make partnerships. We work very close with the Foreign Affairs, Norad, Norfund, all players. So we have an ear to the ground, and trying also to read the room. One thing is supporting companies, and another thing is also understanding the market and see how can we bring the market back home to open more doors and tell about opportunities this African continent has to offer. That being said, of course, there's a lot of feedback on cost of capital, complexity around currency. We all know the risk factors and the challenges of companies growing or expanding or even entering the African continent overall, and then the assumption of risk and the real risk, which is an own debate in itself. However, we see there's we've been trying to target this value chain approach for the last few years at NABA, where we see that there's not just the need for a blended finance model, but also a blended partnership model. And it's been touched upon, earlier among the panelists today, but I think there's a lot of untapped opportunities of really putting, the expertise team together that represent everything from research, civil society, commercial capital, philanthropy capital, government, everything you need to say you're comfortable with de-risking a project or a value chain. And then so we came from it from a commercial point of view, seeing, you know, what's the appetite. And as on everyone's lips, hence being here, critical minerals is a space we watch closely, and there's a lot of investment going into that space in Africa. And I think then you talk about large scale industrial projects, that the spin-off of that is more than just the mining. It's the processing, it's the transportation, it's the energy, it's the whole kind of value chain around it. So from our perspective, is trying to listen to you know, the African financial institutions, also such as Africa Finance Corporation, EcoBank, others, and understand where they face the challenge as well, and how can we, you know, be a part of creating those partnership and support. Norway brings in certain expertise, not just capital, but obviously, you know, we have a lot of technology and very, very great companies. So we also want to look at it from an approach where we try to expand the group of company investors that hasn't necessarily been approaching Africa in the past, to understand what does it take to get them on board. So I think for us, it's try to break down silos, you know, where we look at a full value chain. It could be critical minerals, it can be agri-trade, it could be, you know, but for this part of this conversation, I would like to talk about critical minerals. And then making sure that you are really focusing on the local content and the local value creation within those huge initiatives. And if you work with partners that has this local understanding, we argue that your risk will be taken down. And then, you know, as you said from Norad, in the sense of access to capital is a challenge. I would kind of argue that's lack of instruments. That's because, and if you do that in a partnership that investors feel familiar with, and you structure a fund that for them they are allowed or have an appetite to invest in. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a lot of, I think it's important to think you're working catalytically, like donation is kind of, you will see change of mentality, as we see from different other nations as well. That's not that much on the aid side. And I think if we can offer a more catalytic effect on aid, and be the ones that are willing to take the highest risk, I think that will unlock a lot of projects. So we are still learning and speaking with different stakeholders, but it's an extreme positive activity. I see a lot of movements, which is good. So we are in a position that they are increasingly interested. I think from representing Norwegian companies and having some of their voices, I think that's why I can say that we feel there's a increased interest. I think there's a extreme need to learn and experience, and then when you have a partnership, you can bring that kind of de-risk your, at least your perception of it helps. So yeah, I think I will stop there, but that's some of the reflection we've been doing around the financial structure and partnership models.
Okay, thank you, Solveig. So thank you to the panelists for the introductions. We'll now move on to the discussion, and I'd like to remind all the participants that you may ask questions in the Q&A section throughout this, and at the end we will have a Q&A session if there are any good questions in the Q&A. First question goes to Norad and UNCDF. From your perspective, what are the most persistent gaps that hinder inclusive digital, technological, and financial development today? And why do they remain so difficult to close? I don't know, Anne, do you want to go first?
Happy to go first. It's a big question, and I feel like my answer is more along the lines of we need to understand that better as well. So based on what we've experienced, I mean, there's definitely a huge amount of potential for bringing in market-based solutions, technological solutions, and financial innovations in a more kind of coherent way. You know, from just one example is looking at sort of this question of pipeline. We work with the financial sector in the way to build up solutions that can be investable later on down the road, but targeting getting that right, and making sure that we're not crowding out, we're rather crowding in partners, and using, as Solveig mentioned, taking that type of risk on that is most useful from a public interest standpoint. I think that's something that we want to be sort of very thoughtful and mindful about, not kind of either crowding out or prolonging sort of that question of something becomes is financed for a little bit more down the road, but then there's still a drop off later on, and there's the scale up never really happens. So I think that just kind of points to the need for us to have a good understanding among each other, and maybe start speaking some of the same languages, and start having a shared understanding of the gaps. And I think that will help us. That will help us. And I think on the sort of business side of things, I think going back to the point of what are some of the framework conditions and what are some of the gaps that can be filled with sort of direct interventions, I think will be helpful to dig into a little bit.
So, Tangen, if I can add to that, I mean, look,
Yes.
I think we need to understand that even in the developed countries, I think the chances of attracting outside investment for early stage startups is like 1 in 1,000 or something like that. In the developing world, it's like 1 in 40,000, something like that. It's even more rare, right? And we have to understand what's going on here. And I would break it up into maybe 4 parts. One, of course, is the finance issue. We are talking about risky ventures to begin with. Whether it is perceived or not, the market is not designed to take up that kind of risk on its own. And even domestic finance finds it difficult to go towards these sorts of ventures, because even the local banks have things like, capital adequacy ratios that limit the amount of lending that they can do to provide to these sorts of quote unquote risky opportunities. And you need an almost a non-bank de-risking capability to solve that problem, right? Now, even if you could solve that problem, you're still going to run into issues such as currency risks. If you get investors from outside, you are dealing with currency issues from the get-go. How do you overcome that? So that has to be addressed, and there aren't too many solutions at hand to overcome that. Now, even if you could get past that issue, which is very thin, and this is the reason why UNCDF is now trying to fill that space where even domestic banks don't go, let alone MDBs that are designed that frankly are designed to absorb that kind of risk. And the traditional UN organizations only provide grant funding, which is not exactly what is needed for these sorts of businesses. You're going to run into other issues such as institutional and contracting frictions. You're going to have problems such as investor protection laws. The court systems aren't going to be moving as fast as they need to. Insolvency related issues. A lot of basic things are not in place that actually create the conditions for investor confidence, which need to be addressed. Even if it was there, then you're going to run into a third problem, which we think of as information asymmetry. Not everyone has access to all of this information, and if you're sitting with a fund domiciled in Luxembourg or wherever you are, and trying to find investment opportunities in the other side of the world, it's not easy unless you have a presence on the ground that gives you access to the kind of granularity of information that you need. And then finally, I would term this as sort of the exit issue. These are undeveloped domestic markets in terms of the kind of products that are available. Tend to be very conservative, and unless we deepen the financial sector in these markets where we are seeking to support these sort of early ventures, you run into trouble in terms of the uptake and the exit that is needed. So this is a whole sort of suite of issues that need to be tackled almost simultaneously, which does make it a complex problem to take on, but which doesn't necessarily fit within the realms of what is traditionally in place to support these sort of early ventures. Now, this is something that we're trying to change through bringing UNCDF into the mix. We've discovered, for example, in Afghanistan, what donors were paying for before in grant money could actually be unlocked with a $1 million guarantee and targeted technical assistance to unlock about 36 million of domestic currency for SMEs, right? Many of whom were also, working with new technologies that needed to be adopted. We're now getting ready to support Gaza with the financial de-risking that is needed to crowd in liquidity from several large banks. So, I think we have to figure out ultimately what the system is that needs adjusting. And these are the kinds of issues that have to be tackled over and beyond, the funding or the financing itself. Without that, you're going to run into trouble one way or another, which is I think, through our experience and working with different funds, what we have seen.
Thank you, Pradeep. I see, Petter, you want to come in with a comment here?
Yeah, I'll try to make it short. I think it's important, also much based on what Pradeep is saying, that when you kind of go into an investment case or an idea that should be realized, you have to know what it looks like on the ground. So you have to also, if you're addressing developing a value chain, you have to know what parts are in place and what parts are not in place. Also, what are the gaps? You have to look at the innovation capacity. Is there innovation capacity on the ground, or does it has to be built in parallel? Is there, you could say, is the consortium behind the idea able to realize it? Is the funding available? And the funding has a lot to do with the de-risking. So, and I also just one point, also by experience, also been operating kind of the idea we had about the technology fund in a very small scale in Nepal, and what we sometimes forget is that in the call, also when you're saying that if you want this funding for your project, you have to get these actors together in order to be able to get that funding. So when you have money, to say it that way, it's a really big carrot. So as somebody who wants something to happen, you can kind of dictate what you need to see before you want to spend that money, and that's a real powerful factor.
Thank you, Petter. Solveig, did you want to come in on this, or?
No, I think it's just a lot of good reflections there, and as been said, it's not simple, but I think there's a working with, depending which country you're operating, if it's Middle East or Africa, but my world is always Africa. But the partnership you do with the local players is essential. We believe that it's not just, you need to understand the environment you are working within. And I think that's what we've seen many companies in the past failing, underestimating that complexity, even if you know your own sector inside out. It's just a different landscape to operate in. And then that's where this perception of risk and the translation of that is so extremely important to be part of the de-risking. But it is mechanism in place to take care of that. And I think that's been the job NABA tries to do, at least with some of the capacity, to kind of make sure that those people meet in the first place and get to know one another, understand one another. But I think it has to be a proper partnership. Right. So it's a skin in the game for everyone, it's an upside for everyone, and it has to be on African terms. And I think that's also something to consider when creating this financial mechanism or instruments, is that, how who is benefiting from what, and how long-term sustainable is it, and is it possible to attract other source of capital, and what do you have to do to be able to unlock that opportunity. And the only way to do that, I think, is to sit down with the private sector or the investors that's willing to have a wider range of their portfolio, because the world is changing very fast at the moment. So even if the past we haven't seen, we would like to see more investment into Africa, but I think that will have to change, so there's also, we are in a new area, so to say, which is very interesting to see how can we now meet this new world by creating an instrument and learning from everything that's been done through all the initiatives has been present with financial mechanism and guarantees, and why haven't we seen more results out of it? Why haven't there been more investment coming as a result of it? So, and I think that dialogue has to be with both Africans and then also other commercial investors. But I think partnership is the key for us going forward. Anyway, so that's just some reflections from my end.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Our next question goes to SINTEF. Many promising technologies exist, yet adoption lags in low-income settings. What are the main reasons technologies fail in the implementation phase, even when pilots look successful?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you can say also, I think also when it comes to the adaptation part, I think we've touched on the topic already, in a sense. Also, one of the main things is that you have to know what it looks like on the ground. Also, the local buy-in in the project is essential. And I think there's a lot of technologies in the, you could say, more developed world that can be put to work, but it has to be adopted. And adoption is not just for the technology, but it's much more in how to use it. Also, what are the actors that are kind of keen on making it? What is their role? How can they make funding, and so on? And I think that also you can say that we have as I'm kind of just struggling to be concrete, also because the adoption part is so big. But again, back to the technology fund. Also, I think we have to be fairly concrete. Also, we have to be specific about it. We have to bring those interested in the developing country and those who have the technology together. You can't just sell it. It has to be reinvented in a way, in a local context. And you have to build the innovation capacity at the same time. So that's kind of what we're asking for in this technology development fund, is that building a new value chain also involves building innovation capacity, which is a partnership task. I'll just stop there.
Okay, thank you,
Can I add to that?
Yes, Pradeep.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I was just going to say that, look, I think there are a couple of things I want to make, a point I want to make. One is, it's not enough just to talk about the financing of the technology. We also have to, and I think this is often ignored, focus on the adoption part, which doesn't always come hand in hand with those that provide and focus on the technology, right? You can create the best app in the world, but if it if it annoys you, if it frustrates you, you're going to delete that from your phone immediately. Similarly, for, even if you provide clean energy, and you have some kind of smart tech to do that, if you haven't figured out how people are going to pay for it and keep that tech going, it's going to fail. And it's going to even fail even further if you need additional capital to come in to help you with further development, and that doesn't come. And we've seen this time and time again, where that follow-up support is missing because the market begins to treat these sorts of early stage businesses with brutality. If you don't survive, you're out. But to survive, you need the kind of support that is patient, which follows up and is willing to stay with the risk profile that you are currently sort of, that characterizes you. So these sorts of things don't happen. And this is why I'm excited about this fund, because I think if we can not only set up something that provides that catalytic capital, but also be patient to stay the course even through difficult times, then that is a game changer. Nobody does that. I can't think of a single, institution in the world today that does that, as they are very much focused on seeding funds. They're very much focused on making sure that, we can talk about funds being available, but it's the day after that sometimes matters most. And very few focus on the day after.
Thank you, Pradeep. Any other comments on this, or yes, Petter?
Yeah, I can coming back to it. No, I think also one issue is that who's gonna put the money into our fund, and I think the wish from the entrepreneurs is that the fund is a blended fund, which is a place where you can kind of get something in the start, and then as you progress, you can kind of get more funding as you pass milestones or something like that. And that's kind of a challenge to the financial community. Also, money from governments, money from the private sector of different types. Also, it's really hard to kind of put all this together from an entrepreneur who's starting, and then to build it afterwards. So if that could be made much more easier, I think that would be a very good thing. And another point that I forgot, my last question was that, also, we've been discussing a little bit kind of what happens on the energy side in Africa, south of Sahara. And when it comes to the cost of energy supplied, it's obvious that PV and batteries and then wind is kind of the least cost option. But there's large economic powers that are pushing oil and gas. And if we want kind of the green shift to happen, or phrased in another way, I think that Africa, south of Sahara, will be kind of a battleground between renewable energy, which is kind of the cheapest, and oil and gas. And the advantage with PVs and batteries is that it's distributed, small scale, and very scalable. And scalability when it comes to kind of solving the electrification issue for the 500 million not having access to electricity. That's kind of the key to it. Thank you.
Very good. So interesting perspectives, and I think we'll move on to Norad now. I have a question for you. Can and should Norway make use of its standing within international development to suggest new mechanisms for increasing implementation of climate technologies and innovations in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's an interesting time because it does feel like suddenly Norway and Norad is taking up more space in the international development community than before. And so, that might be attributed to the fact that we've maintained our 1% of GNI for foreign aid, is something we're quite proud of, but also that we've been using our voice and our platforms to advocate for, some of the principles of development cooperation, including anti-corruption, pro-democracy, sort of the maintaining focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. But it's also become clear that strategic alliances are part of the solution going forward. So, for instance, one of those things that we've seen where we can use our voice to also be amplified through partnerships has been through the Investment Mobilization Collaboration Alliance. So this is a Nordic-led group of donors with also memberships from other agencies around the globe and organizations that focuses on joining up our blended finance approaches. So the idea here is that we can take a leading role in advocating for more joint approaches, less fragmentation, sort of using our opportunities and our platforms to help with that sort of focus on efficacy and learning, not to mention from each other. So we don't always want to go it alone, but we can be a strong proponent for collaboration in a strategic way. And I think by doing that, we can also sort of, we can experience less risk on our side. We're learning together, we're trying new approaches, but it's not just on our end. If something goes wrong, we're kind of there to absorb both the highs and the lows. And for instance, this alliance I mentioned initially had USAID as a founding member, but now with them having disappeared from the field, so to speak, we've been able to maintain that progress even going forward. So I think it does show that, you know, these kind of initiatives, that if we're on our own, the risk is much higher in several different ways. And some of the topics I think we can use our platforms to advocate for instance, when it comes to deployment of technology, you know, one of the things that we've been vocal about is the use of open source solutions, where, you know, there's the ability to scale up access and impact through the use of technology is much more accessible by using open source solutions. And it's sort of a more kind of democratic approach in some way. But I think we also have to look internally. So if we are to kind of work more closely with partners, you know, traditionally Norad has been a grant-focused organization, and that sort of has its own implications of how we partner and what are our roles and relationships. If we want to, you know, go into more kind of collaborative, co-creative approaches, we might look at other types of agreement with partners, so that we can kind of extend our reach, while at the same time kind of incorporate more expertise from our partners. And then I'll just say that we also want to sort of maintain a focus on learning and what our experience has been. So looking around in our sector, you know, there's a lot of pitfalls with tech transfer approaches. For instance, you know, misadapted technology that sits unused, especially one of the, you know, focus areas that there's a lot of attention towards now, which is climate adaptation and resilience. You know, what we can learn from Norway is there's a lot of technological solutions that cannot just be plug and play in our partner countries. So we have to kind of look at what we have to share that knowledge, I guess is what I'm saying. We have to share those experiences so that we don't make the same mistakes again.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, thank you so much. Any comments on this?
Yeah, if I can
yes.
maybe add to that. I mean, we're definitely seeing, you know, what Anna mentioned out in the field. I mean, let's take the Gaza transaction. You know, the Qatar Fund for Development, you know, has come in. The government of Kingdom of Netherlands has come in. Now Norway, through the embassy in Jerusalem, is thinking of coming in. This sort of coalition is absolutely critical to make sure that not only are we layering the risk against multiple sources. But it's also building on the work of others. And in, Palestine is a great example because UNDP is currently very active on the ground with a lot of the, post, a conflict support that is needed, including debris removal and getting the small businesses going. What we want to do is then come in behind that and build off of it so that continuum stays intact. And beyond the initial support that the bilaterals are able to support, we are effectively trying to get the domestic market up and running. So you need to jumpstart everything again. And that requires liquidity to come in from the large institutions so that then the domestic financial market can get going and get off the ground. So it's that sort of continuum. It doesn't happen automatically. You have to almost engineer it, and you have to stay the course to see that whole pathway taking root. And that, I think, is something that requires a collaborative effort and patience. But we don't really find that in enough supply in some of these contexts, particularly when it comes to these sorts of tech, solutions and support that's needed.
Yeah, thank you, Pradeep. Any other comments, Solveig or Petter? You want to come in, or should we move on? So we're unfortunately running out of time, so we have to move on to the next segment. And I think before we do that, there's a final question for each of the panelists, and that is, what are the necessary steps to move this forward? So from your perspective, please go ahead. Wants to start? Petter?
I can start. No, I think it's important to kind of talk together. Also we need to get out of the silos and kind of start talking to kind of shape the also to agree on what's needed to really get off the ground and make something happen. Also, if we work in our silos, we or work on just a part of a chain, nothing big will happen. If it's not scalable, nothing big will happen. So we need to kind of find out how to design the processes and which actors need to be there in order to kind of create something that's sustainable and can grow by itself. And that's, I think, is the difference between having a lot of money to throw after a challenge as opposed to having just a little bit. If you have a little bit, you have to create something that can, also like a child, that can grow up and kind of really do a lot of work, and then maybe create even more childs as things are time is passing. So we really need to be smart when it comes to giving birth and to something that can grow and expand by time. And in order to do that, all the sectors need to get together and start shaping the framework.
Okay, thank you, Petter. Should we move on to Anne?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I don't have too much to add, but I do think that we want to understand, some of the key we want to get answers to some of the key questions. So, whether we want to look at sector by sector or we want to look at, take a different approach. We want to understand sort of what are the, what do we have to offer here from the Norwegian private sector that might play into sort of a technology fund or a collaboration? What can we bring from sort of a whole of Norway approach? And what, is it worth kind of putting a lot of effort into bringing that on, or should we keep it, open to everything? Well, we want to make it something like this should be flexible enough that we're meeting the needs, but we also will hold ourselves accountable to working towards the sustainable development goals. And so questions like how confident are we that the solutions that are being supported through such a fund will actually advance progress towards the goals. And just going back to the pipeline question and sort of like the hitting the right spot in terms of our patient, our risk tolerant, our pretty flexible funding. We want to also see that, consider all the options, right? Like, are there existing initiatives that could do this? Do they just need to be enhanced? Is there a potential for networking existing? There's a lot of innovation funds around. Is there something that needs to happen for them to be unlocked? And so we're at the point where we're really trying to sort of be mindful of what is our value add and our value proposition in such a thing. And I think, as Petter said, starting and continuing the conversations and being sort of open with our partners, I think is a good place to be. And then we'll be kind of thinking of how much we want to be going into direct interventions, or balancing that also with the sort of business enabling and the framework conditions that we're also supporting.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Should we move to Solveig and then finish off with Pradeep? Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think, as you said, Anna, I think it's the world consists a lot of data that's been done in the past. I think we have I think the approach has to be based on, what the market condition, what the market wants. Sometimes you can't always know, but it has to be a commercial driver in the end. There has to be an appetite, and then figuring out how can you de-risk to make that investable for capital you would like to see flowing into developing part of the world. And as a part of these larger initiatives, I think you can see a tremendous spin-off, because scalability is extremely important. So, but if the basics are in place, if you have infrastructure, access to energy, that will unlock everything else. So I think it's just trying to understand who will be your partners, who are lifting this type of sizable projects. How can you tap into those partnerships to come in with technological expertise, funding expertise, but then do it in large scale partnership, because the heavy lifting that has to be done is tremendous and nobody can do this alone. So I think depending on the focus of where it move in, but I think it's fascinating to see what's happening at the continent. If you look at Lobito corridor, for example, right? What does that mean when that's completed? I think, and that will unlock tremendous opportunities and flows of goods and people and whatnot. So I think learning from the past and looking at real data statistics of what we have based from the banks and institutions that's been investing, and figuring out, why has it been that others haven't been invested in those instruments in the past, and see if you can adjust in a way that fits their future mandate. Because now I think many are figuring out how to adapt to the new world order. So I think the flexibility is there among more people than it was in the past. So I tend to be optimistic.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, maybe 2-3 points. One, I think for me, what we are seeing is really, it does matter the mechanism that is deploying this risk-tolerant capital. If the mechanism itself cannot absorb risks, then having that risk-tolerant capital within a certain type of fund isn't going to help, because you're going to be constrained in deployment, and you're going to be constrained in actually absorbing the kind of risks that have to be overcome. So we have to make sure that, and this is something that we're doing now at UNCDF, instead of just giving out grants as UNCDF did in the past, we're now actually using that same grant money as guarantees, but deploying them in a risk-absorbing manner. In other words, we're not afraid if some of that money goes away or has to go away because of bad deals, but we're going to deploy it in those markets, because someone has to go in first and unlock that risk. And once you are able to price risk better, then the others can come in. So that's one way in which our offer is definitely changing. This is going to require a multinational platform because at the end of the day, a lot of the knowledge that we're talking about is in different places that needs to be brought together, and working off platforms that are actually operational at the country level, that is fully embedded and understands what the local private sector ecosystem looks like, is absolutely critical to join the dots. And then thirdly, I think incentives also have to be right across the value chain. When we deploy our money, we expect skin in the game, so that the donors that are funding UNCDF also get some value add, beyond just using their money as the 100% risk collateral. So I think if we bring all of these elements together into what we're discussing now in this new fund, we will definitely be additive in the broader ecosystem out there. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all the panelists. It's been a very nice discussion, very fruitful, I think, and we are unfortunately, as I said before, running out of time here. So we haven't received a lot of questions in the Q&A section. So I think to the closing remarks, so we can finish this somewhat on time. So Anneli, please.
Thank you, Tannes. There are a few questions in the Q&A session, but because of time limits, we're skipping them. But if this, especially to Solveig and Anna, there are some questions. So if you want to write a comment there afterwards, you can. But yeah, as Tannes said, thank you to the panelists. This has been very insightful. Also, thank you to you, Tannes, for hosting this conversation. I think that what we heard is quite clear. The technologies are there, needs are urgent, and the potential here is actually quite enormous if we can make it work. But of course, as we talked about, it depends on something other than just the technology and just the innovation, but on collaboration and capacity building and financing models that are actually supporting this implementation and that are catalytic and not just symbolic in their nature. Well, this is part of us bringing it back to the series that we started. This is part of why we joined forces in this series, and we are going to continue to explore it every month until June. Our next session is on the 4th of March, and we will focus on rebuilding in crisis with Ukraine as the starting point and see how we can design recovery efforts that are resilient and realistic and future-oriented. So I hope that we will see all of you who have joined today there. We will share the registration page with you once it's published. So I think, on behalf of SINTEF and UN Capital Development Fund, thank you all for joining today and your commitment to building solutions that actually make a change. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a wonderful day.